Let's talk about the philosophy of resistance. And we can start with what it isn't. Resistance, the way I think and write about it as a process and as a concept, is not protest. And the distinction matters. Hi, I'm Tad Sturmer. I teach public history at Johns Hopkins, and I'm the author of the forthcoming A Resistance History of the United States. Most Americans, I suppose most people around the world, confuse protest with resistance. Let me know in the comments if that's true for you. But they're not the same. Protest asks, resistance refuses. Protest stays within the bounds of what the system allows. Resistance shatters the boundaries. If you watched Andor, you know. That's not a semantic difference. It's not a fictional one either. It's the core political distinction of our time, right now. We're living it. And if we don't get it right, historically, philosophically, and tactically, we'll keep mistaking compliance for courage. And we have to begin with Thoreau. Not because he had the final word, but because he asked the right question. Henry David Thoreau asked, "What do I owe a government that commits injustice in my name?" In Civil Disobedience, Thoreau offers a template for what we now recognize as the American philosophy of refusal. He wouldn't pay a tax that funded war and slavery. He didn't call for reform. He withdrew his consent. That moment, and the thinking behind it, born of his family's loyalist past in the American Revolution, shaped every act of American resistance that followed. But Thoreau's real value isn't just in what he did. It's in why he did it. He recognized something many still refuse to admit, that legitimacy isn't permanent. Governments can lose it, and when they do, obedience becomes complicity. He's the start of something we need to understand more fully, a philosophy of resistance, something that I kind of needed to put together for my work. And that philosophy doesn't depend on permission or approval or even success. It just depends upon clarity and refusal. So we start there and then need to go further. If Thoreau cracks the door, thinkers like Hannah Arendt and Albert Camus walk through it with purpose. Arendt warns us that the greatest danger isn't cruelty. It's the quiet, bureaucratic normalization of it. Systems that demand obedience don't ask you to commit atrocities. They just ask you to stop asking questions. Just think about the Marines and National Guard troops that are in Los Angeles right now, wondering what they are doing there. The real insight is that tyranny doesn't begin with violence. It begins with acquiescence. And resistance starts when someone stops cooperating with the lie. Camus picks up the thread in The Rebel, arguing that resistance is not a strategy. It's not even political, strictly speaking. It's existential. Resistance happens when a person says, "I will no longer be what this regime requires me to become." And that act, regardless of outcome, is what preserves human dignity in the face of oppression. That choice, whether part of digital activism or how you resolve what you see in the morning in the mirror, is the moment you join the resistance. So what about Gandhi and King? This is usually when I'm having these discussions where somebody says, what about Gandhi? What about King? It's a fair question. And the answer matters. Not because they aren't important, but because the kind of work they did doesn't belong in the same category I'm building here. Both Gandhi and King practiced a powerful public protest that was grounded in moral appeal. The idea that nonviolent witness could awaken the conscience of the oppressor in a macro sense. King called it soul force. Great term. Their goal was to change abusive systems by holding up a mirror to it, to expose its hypocrisy and demand that it live up to its own values, live up to the promise of America, right? To the promises of the founders. But here's the difference, and maybe the embedded cynicism of anyone who does this kind of work. Consider it the Luthen rule. If you know, you know. Soul force assumes the system that produces abusive authority has a soul worth appealing to. It assumes the structure is broken but salvageable. That's protest. That's reform. That's righteous pleading with a power you still believe might listen. Resistance doesn't do that. Resistance starts from a different premise, that the system itself is illegitimate and participation in it is complicity. That obedience is not just ineffective, but morally intolerable. Gandhi and King were fighting to purify the systems they lived in. Resistance in the tradition I'm tracing here isn't trying to purify anything. It's trying to survive, expose, destabilize, and sometimes destroy. That's why the thinkers who define this tradition for me, Arendt, Camus, Havel, Scott, Conor Cruise O'Brien to a certain extent, don't offer moral purity. They offer clarity. They don't assume change is possible. They act because inaction is consent. That's the line. So no, Gandhi and King aren't part of this framework. Not because they were wrong, but because they were working toward a different kind of transformation. Resistance in its clearest form doesn't want transformation. It wants rupture. Slavery in the United States did not end because an inherently good system was reformed from within, no matter what the apologists of the founders tell you. The constitutional and political and cultural authorities that perpetuated chattel slavery in the United States had to be destroyed. There was no reforming them. And it took America's worst war to do it. So now let's talk about Scott and Havel and everyday resistance. Where Arendt and Camus give us the ethics of resistance, James C. Scott and Václav Havel give us its tactics. Scott's work, especially Domination and the Arts of Resistance, remind us that most resistance isn't visible. You can't see it. It happens in whispers, delays, evasions, minor acts of defiance that people engage in every single day, that they have to assent to, that they have to commit to every day, that collectively wear down power's ability to maintain itself. And that insight's key. Even when resistance fails, it forces power to work harder to maintain control, so we can redefine what success means in a resistance context. It exposes the lie that obedience is natural. And Havel, writing under Soviet occupation, makes the stakes clear. His essay, The Power and the Powerless, lays out the principle that shaped dissident movements across Eastern Europe. Living in truth, under a system built on lies, is itself resistance. Even a small refusal, taking down the slogan that shows up in your FYP or Instagram feed, declining to fake belief, can rupture the state's carefully curated reality. Their insistence on shaping your understanding of reality is, what your history was, how we got from then to now, has been, in ways that are entirely not authentic, but entirely serve their abusive authority purposes. In a totalizing regime, truth is dangerous and necessary. So telling the truth, active resistance. You say, no, I will not be governed by their lies. So resistance is a line crossed. It's a boundary enforced by a single defiant word. No. Now, that no doesn't come from ideology. Oddly enough, for a philosophy of resistance, it is free of most ideology. It's even free from most politics, which is why it gets you above partisanship. It comes from the moment you realize you are being asked to participate in your own erasure or in someone else's. Why this matters now? Well, we live in a time when people are encouraged to protest, but only in ways that don't threaten anything, that don't threaten even their own comfort. File a complaint, make a call, sign a petition, give money. Then wait for others within the system, judges and politicians, to act or not. We're surrounded by rituals of democratic engagement that are designed to exhaust us without actually changing anything, not systemically, not structurally. And that's why we need to recover a philosophy of resistance, not one rooted in moral purity. I'm not here for that, but in clarity. One that demands refusal and does not promise success and gives you examples out of the past that you can rely on, that you can trust, and that you can apply to your own context in whatever way works for you. Thoreau pointed to it. Arendt explained its stakes. Camus gave us its moral backbone. And Scott showed us how it survives. Havel lived it. So resistance isn't symbolic. It's not performative. It's structural. It's visceral. And it's risky. And it doesn't ask permission.